Welcome back to the Wealth Builder podcast. My name's Nick Donato, and I'm a financial advisor at Guidance Financial. Off the top of the podcast, I want to debunk a myth. There's no official age of retirement in Australia. You can work for as long as you want, and you can also retire as early as you want, if you have the financial means to do so. Now, there's a lot of talk about age 60, 65, 67, which are all significant ages from a superannuation access and a Centrelink age pension point of view. Not for retirement age, though. So today, we're going to discuss early retirement. So today I'm joined again by Paul Benson, host of the Financial Autonomy podcast and fellow advisor at Guidance Financial. Thanks for joining me again today, Paul.
Hey, g'day, Nick. Good to jump back on the podcast, and good topic of conversation.
Yeah, 100%. We deal with a lot of people who retire early, who retire a bit later in life. But I guess what is the concept of retirement?
Yeah, well, the concept of retirement. I mean, it's stopping to work, isn't it? I mean, it's stopping work for money anyway. I mean, you still need something to keep you occupied, but retirement generally means ceasing being an employee. And I guess if you're running your own business, then perhaps it's associated with selling your business and exiting, and I guess a life of leisure, I suppose, is what we think about in retirement. What have I missed?
Yeah, doing whatever you want, going overseas, on holidays, looking after the kids or grandkids like my mum. Heaps of things you can do in retirement for sure. But I guess early retirement might be slightly different to those retiring a bit earlier. It might mean, gaining choices, getting some autonomy. I mean, you've got a long time to travel if you retire in your 30s, 40s, or 50s. So you've got to fill your time with one or two things to do, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I guess that's historically the Financial Autonomy podcast, and of course the hopefully most of the listeners get the weekly email too, the Gaining Choice email, and so yeah, gaining choice is an idea that we've explored quite a lot, and it's all just born out of discussions that I've had with past clients, and I guess learning from them and also reverse engineering what's worked and what hasn't. And so from what I've seen in terms of those who are looking for early retirement, and I guess just to define, typically we would think of that as earlier than 60, right? Because from 60 onwards, you can access your super. So early retirement, just as a rough definition, is someone who wants to retire earlier than 60 is the way I normally think of it, Nick. I don't know for you, but yeah, and I guess from what I've seen people in that circumstance, it's usually because the work they're doing is very high stress, often quite financially rewarding though. So they're in it, they get themselves in a very strong financial position, but the pressure and the stress takes its toll. You don't get paid big dollars just because you're a nice person and you've got a good smile. Like you got to give a lot to generate that high level of income. That takes its toll, and so eventually people decide, you know what, I've had enough. I need to step back and do something easier, which is where the concept of gaining choice comes in. So frequently, in my experience at least, people that are looking to retire early, sometimes it is I guess a traditional retirement insofar as they just want to put the feet up and play golf, which is fine. But often that's actually not what people want to do. They've got other things that they want to do with their life, and they just want to step away from a high pressure career. Have you come across many people working through this sort of early retirement stage, Nick?
Yeah, early retirement sounds great, as you said. Kick the feet up and play golf if that's what you're into, or travel, or do a few other things with the family and whatnot. But a lot of the time, not a fair bit of the time, you see people retire for a couple of years. They might lose some purpose or lose some drive and want to regain some of that. And you find people going back on a part-time basis just to get some human interaction or something to fill their days with. So yeah, a lot of the times, not for everyone, but people do go back to work, we see, from in a volunteer capacity even, just to spice it up and get something else rather than just doing the day to day.
Yeah, I think I've certainly come across people that have done that, had a period out, recharged the batteries, but right, I'm ready for a new challenge. Or as you say, perhaps they're a bit bored and they're looking for something new to do. In fact, there was don't want to name names obviously for privacy reasons, but there was the client we caught up with just last week who was a teacher and finished up, and now he works at Bunnings and yeah, he just likes it because it gets him out of the house and he meets people and he enjoys it. He doesn't really need to do it for financial reasons, but he didn't particularly retire early, but on the early side. And yeah, it doesn't mean that it has to be a life of sitting on the couch watching TV, which most people would find pretty uninteresting. So
I
yeah.
guess it goes into the whole aspects of gaining choice where
Mm.
you've got the option to retire early or whenever you want to retire, but you've also got the option to volunteer or work or do something that's a bit different from what you used to do, potentially career change or yeah, gaining that choice basically as a sense of early retirement.
Yeah, that's what I think we should all aspire to. And I mean, that was the original thought bubble behind the Financial Autonomy podcast right from the outset was, how can you put yourself in that position that, yeah, if work is getting to the point where it's making you unhappy, that you don't feel like, well, I've got to keep doing it anyway because I can't get off the treadmill.
Hmm.
And so I guess that's where we try and help people, of course, both through the podcast, but also obviously in terms of the clients that we work with as well.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, where do you want to go next?
Yeah, the next thing I guess it's all about pre-retirement, early retirement, sorry, is a thought, an idea, but at the end of the day, to be able to achieve that goal, we need to have the financial backing to be able to live the life and the lifestyle that we want to live through retirement. So a lot of the questions are how much do I need to have in the bank account, in the super fund, in the investment portfolio to be able to retire? And at the end of the day, it's a unique number for every single person. There's a couple of, generalizations and rules that you can look at for those that aren't early retirees. It was 20 times your annual expenses when you're 65 potentially, and then that potentially will give you enough to see you through your times. Uh, the Association of Superannuation Funds of Australia, they've got numbers and statistics saying that as a single, you need about $55,000 to have a per annum to have a comfortable retirement, or 35 to have a modest. And for a couple, obviously a bit more, 76,000 to have a comfortable retirement, or 50 to have a modest retirement. Now, what does comfortable mean to me? What does comfortable mean to you? Something completely different, potentially. So yeah, it's a unique number for everyone. Paul, do you have anything to add there?
No, I mean, I think you're right in that, yeah, you've got to identify if you're going to plan, if you're trying to put together a strategy, right, how can I orchestrate an early retirement? Then, yeah, unquestionably, a key input is, well, what does it cost me to live? Um, and obviously, the lower the number, then the more feasible or the easier it is to achieve your early retirement objective if that's your goal. I would one observation again, just from seeing different people who have gone down this path. Most people who pursue early retirement, a key stepping stone to that would be clearing their mortgage, because it's just an extension of what we're talking about here in terms of what does it cost me to live. Well, if you've got to come up with 30 grand a year for a mortgage or something, that obviously makes it much harder. Whereas if you own the roof over your head, uh, then your living costs to do everything else are that much lower. So I would say often an important stepping stone, because sometimes we get people want to know, well, can I retire early and when can I retire early? Well, one input for that would be, well, how quickly can we get this mortgage paid off? Because that's just a key enabler. And there's different ways you can do that. So it could be just paying it off as you normally do. It could be downsizing, right? Or it could be doing a tree change or something like that. There's some clients of ours that sold out in Blackrock, which is a fairly expensive part of Melbourne, and moved down the coast, and a lovely house close to the beach, but a couple of hours out of Melbourne. But in doing that, they became debt free. So that gave them a whole lot of options. So so those kind of things are certainly possible. But I would just suggest, mortgage free is an ingredient in making this happen.
100%. And the other, aside from a tree change or a sea change, the other thing that we do sometimes see is clients wanting to retire overseas where it might be a bit cheaper to live. Southeast Asia and Bali is definitely a very
Mm-hmm.
popular one where potentially costs might be lower. I'm not 100% sure if that's correct or true. I haven't really been to Bali, but it potentially, people moving to cheaper areas might help their goal if that's their desire.
Even if it's just for a portion of the year, perhaps could help, couldn't it? Yeah. I guess.
Mm.
How about? Well, when you're putting these sort of plans together, Nick, and I'm sure you've had the same experience. But normally, when I'm thinking of it, I'm thinking about, right. Well, we need to solve for the period 60 and above, which is going to be
Mhm.
solved by superannuation, and then separately, we need to solve the pre-60 period, right? So usually, when I'm looking at if someone's trying to pursue early retirement, well, first and foremost, can we be satisfied that from 60 onwards they're going to be okay? And often that's the case, because often people that are considering this, as I mentioned earlier, they're usually high income earners. Therefore, their employer's probably been doing some pretty big super contributions, maybe maxing out. And if they've sort of had this mindset, if the employer isn't maxing it out, very often the person might have done a bit of salary sacrifice anyway. So it could be that, let's say, by the age of 50, they might have a significant amount in super, such that if it's just left alone to compound, it's going to be very good, right? So that's an important ingredient, because an important enabler, as I mentioned, clearing the mortgage is a good enabler. Having superannuation well funded such that it's fine if you don't contribute for a period of time and just let it compound, that's another important enabler. But then we've got to solve for the period before age 60, and that's probably the most interesting area. I've got a few different thoughts on that, Nick, but maybe did you want to jump in and how do you think about that when you're working with your clients?
Yeah, and to add on to the post 60 before we jump into the pre 60, the
Mm.
other, circling back to the top of the podcast, the other age we mentioned was 67. So 67 is the age pension age where you can potentially access Centrelink age pension. Obviously, there's some tests, income and assets tests that, people have to be under to be eligible for any of that. But that's also can build into your long-term plan if we do retire early, live off super, and then potentially supplement with the age pension much later in life. But from a pre-60 point of view, I guess that we have to have sufficient assets in our personal name, in our trusts, in our businesses, whatever it is. Ultimately, sufficient assets outside of super to be able to fund our lifestyle so we can bridge the gap up until 60 and we get that access. This you can see people building up personal share portfolios with, uh, different investments of different sectors that will pay dividends and distributions where they can live off the income and potentially sell down some capital to bridge the gap between the income they receive and their expenses to get them through to that age.
Actually, sorry, just to interrupt, Nick, but just on that, that's a good point, just that I have observed, and it's worth sharing with the listeners. Selling down, right? Sometimes I think because the person that's entertaining this early retirement goal, they're good savers, right? I mean, they wouldn't be retiring early if they're spending a fortune and credit card debts up to their ears, right? They're usually financially astute people who are used to accumulating and saving, and so decumulating, selling some investments to live off, really goes against the grain. I've found some people really struggle with it, even though it totally makes sense. You've built up this portfolio. Now you're going to have this period of time where you need to live off it. It's okay to be progressively selling that down over a few years, especially since your super is sitting in the background compounding. So, and perhaps your house as well, hopefully. So actually your total asset position is probably still growing. It's totally fine if you use up some of your accumulated assets, because if the only way you succeed in this, or permit yourself to retire early, is if I've got enough liquid investments that it throws off enough income, this passive income type talk, which I get the concept of passive income, but sometimes I think it's oversimplified. But if your feeling is, well, I can't retire early unless I have this passive income that can cover all my expenses, that's a really high bar, right? That
Hmm.
could easily mean that you stick with a job you don't like or something for an unnecessarily long period of time. Whereas if actually you crunch the numbers, you could actually sell down some capital. So
Yeah.
it's one of a lot of times in financial planning, I'm sure you come across it all the time as well, Nick. There's what looks correct on a spreadsheet, and then there's the reality of when life interacts with humans, and
Hmm.
and that's a classic one, right? Where we can do the spreadsheet and show, yep, you got this much money, and you're going to sell down 50 grand a year, and then that plus your rental income and whatever your dividends, blah blah blah, it's going to be fine. And then you get there, and people go, oh, but I don't want to have to sell down any of my investments. I just want it all to be passive income. Well, if that's the case, you're going to have to work a whole bunch longer,
Yeah.
which was not the original goal, right? I don't know. Have you
100%.
have you stumbled across that?
Yeah, I guess relating to those people, it can be scary because it's you're not employed, you're not earning an income anymore. So is this amount of assets going to last me for as long as I need, or am I going to be forced to go back to work and start figuring out, forced to sell the house or forced to do something else to, maintain my lifestyle? So I can see how it could be scary
Mm.
in terms of selling investments, but it's ultimately a thing that has to be done to be able to, live potentially, depending on someone's asset base and whatnot. But I guess the one bit of comfort that some people can take is by doing the projections, by double checking the numbers to see, no, I'll be okay. While here at Guidance, we have all those complex projection tools that we use for clients and, can project all that out. And if you are doing your own projections, we'd definitely say be conservative on the return figures and, go up above and beyond on your expenses because the car blows up and we need to find 20, 30K to buy the car. Hopefully, we've built some levies in, some emergency cash flow in to fund those. So we're not scraping for every penny because we've retired early.
Yeah.
So I understand when it comes, when, it can be viewed as a bit scary to start selling stuff down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, I mean, the other thing, so again, just focusing in on this pre-60 period, right?
Mm.
Um, so yes, investments, how are we going to live off those, potentially sell some down, as we've just spoken about. Um, Another way that I've seen it done is where people pick up some sort of part-time work or just a less demanding role, right? Their reason, I mean, if you're, and I'm picking on 50 here only because that's just what I've seen the most of, but if you're someone who decides, right, my goal is to retire at 50, um, you're still young and fit and active, most people at least at 50, right? I mean, there's plenty of people that work into their 70s these days. So you've got potentially a whole lot more that you could give. Um, and the driver is, again, not most people don't want to retire and sit on the couch and watch soaps or something, right? Um, they just don't want to keep doing what they have been doing because for whatever reason it's making them unhappy. So it could be that the solution until age 60 and potentially even beyond age 60 is not to draw on investments or anything. It could just be, well, all I need to do, if I can be mortgage free, if I can satisfy myself that, look, super's going to be fine. So my long-term security is okay. And what I need to do is plug a 10-year gap or whatever that period is until it makes sense for me to start drawing down on my super. Maybe I can do that working 3 days a week in a far less stressful role. It could be 5 days a week for that matter. But the solution might not be anything to do with investments, and it could just be an employment solution, provided you've crunched the numbers and done the modelling, as you just touched on, Nick, to satisfy yourself that you're not going to regret it when you're 75.
Hmm. Yeah, and the part-time or the casual consult temporary work, again, it can increase. You can supplement that work with investments if you want. So you can supplement that with your investments, that part-time work, to prolong the longevity of your funds and the longevity of your investment portfolio, if that's where we've landed. So it's definitely a way to go. You've gained some choice and you've made the option or the decision to work for half the pay, a quarter of the pay, 1 day a week, 2 days a week, whatever that looks like. It is still a sense of retirement because we're not just doing what we did yesterday and working the same job. So it is still, or could be still considered early retirement.
And remember, there was that lady we spoke to, we did a little bit of work for. I'm pretty sure you were in the meeting with me. It could have been Brendan, where she had a really interesting career background in the health sector, like administration, hospitals, and that sort of stuff. And then when she left that, she was taking on contracts for the United Nations. And she picked up a 3-month contract here, a 6-month, all around the world, really interesting. But with the financial security, she paid off her house, that sort of stuff. That if she had 6 months where she didn't have a contract, it was fine, and actually kind of quite suited her. But yeah, she seemed to be living her best life for sure, and still making a good contribution to the world, and still feeling good about herself. Right, she's getting out and about. But yeah, to have that once again, that choice, is a strong position to be in. Just something else I thought I'd throw in. Again, just from observations from people I've worked with in the past, education, and there's two elements to this. So I've had a couple of instances where people's motivation for sort of early retirement, although usually it's more like a sabbatical, right? They just want to take a couple of years out. But it can be to go back and do like a master's, maybe even a PhD. I think I might have had one person that tried that. But going back and doing some education can be a motivation. And that's not a bad idea. I'm thinking of one person, again, actually, she's in the healthcare sector, but took a couple of years off, did her master's, went back, and she was earning, I don't know, 120 when she left, and she got back, and now she's earning 180 because all of a sudden she's more qualified, right? So having, again, it's maybe early retirement, maybe I'm in the wrong episode, Nick, but still, it's tangential for sure, right? It's perhaps career break is the more applicable one there.
Yeah.
But the other thing, just in terms of the education piece, as I mentioned, just often the people that are pursuing early retirement, it's because the role that they're in is they just don't like it anymore, usually for reasons of stress. Sometimes, though, people can feel trapped because it's the only thing that they're skilled to do. And so it's maybe just, again, just focusing on choice. A way you can gain choice is to have a few extra skills in your toolkit. And then maybe that might give you an opportunity to do some other things. Now, it could be that you, as I kind of just touched on, a career break or something like that, and actually you reskill in something completely different. But it could be that during your career, you try and find an opportunity to do some other training. In some instances, your employer might even support you in that, right? But upskilling yourself so that you have got a few more options. Especially, at the moment with AI and tech and all this sort of stuff, it would be easy to get left behind, right? And then that clearly reduces your choices. So, and I've seen it certainly with software where one client I'm thinking of in particular, she was just a guru on a particular piece of software that insurance companies used. But increasingly, insurance companies moved to another software architecture. She didn't know that. She only knew the one she was in. And so her job opportunities got less and less and less until towards the end of her career, there was only one insurance company left that was still using that software. And eventually that kind of ended up. And so she had to retire earlier than she really wanted to because she hadn't maintained her skills and done the education. So, yeah, anyway, just a couple of ways that might fold into an early retirement discussion, but just one that, again, just through experience of dealing with a lot of clients over the years, is maybe just worth sharing for the listeners.
Yeah, and that upskilling and year break or sabbatical for education is one point. We've also seen recently some people planning this sabbatical years in advance,
Mm,
where they're gonna take a year off to go to the Galapagos or scuba dive somewhere or do something like that. Um, so there's a runway to plan that year off because we know that our job's demanding or we want an early retirement but can't financially afford it. So the next best option is this year off to travel or sit on the couch, do whatever you want, really.
mm.
Um, but that's also, again, a step back from early retirement potentially, but a choice that you can gain.
But also, potentially, you could, let's say you're in a circumstance, you're in a job that is high stress and unsustainable, and you feel like you need a break. Your first port of call might be, all right, well, I've got to work on until I'm at the point where I can just retire. Which then we might crunch the numbers and say, okay, well, if that's the case, you've got to work 5 more years. Now, that's pretty unpalatable if you're already in a position where you're finding work unsustainable. So maybe it's a shift of goal. And rather than, well, I need to keep working until I've got enough money to retire early, maybe it should be, well, I need to keep working until I can afford to have 2 years of no income. Because then the answer might be, well, in that case, you can do that next year or 6 months or whatever, right? And maybe you'd model it, okay, 2 years of no income, and then when I go back, I'm going to earn half what I do now. And we could model that and test that. And if you've gotten yourself in a strong position, it just might mean that you've got that choice far earlier than maybe you considered. And so, because I guess we didn't really touch on this at the start, Nick, but early retirement. So we're financial planners. So when we're thinking about early retirement, we're thinking about, all right, financially, how can we solve that for someone? How can we make that happen? But of course,
Mhm.
there's a whole other element here as to whether early retirement's actually going to make you happy, right? Because humans need purpose, and generally they need other humans around them as well. And early retirement can potentially deny you of both, right? Um, so I guess it is just worth delving into if you've got in mind I want to retire early to really just think through why do I want to retire early, and in fact is that the best goal? Because maybe it's not the solution to the problem that you're trying to solve, even though it perhaps initially presents that it is. I don't know, Nick, you got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I agree. Maybe potentially, as you said, we've chatted about education, sabbaticals, and whatnot. Maybe it's not the industry you want to be in. You fell in love with it, and you liked your job, but then the stress or the workload got too much, and potentially the politics, who knows?
Mm.
So then you need, a year off, or you want to, find a new passion. So I guess that builds into that having a purpose.